For over a century, a system existed in Canada that aimed to erase Indigenous cultures by targeting the youngest members of their communities, children. Residential schools were not ordinary schools. They were tools of assimilation, forcing Indigenous children to abandon their languages, traditions, and families. Today, we'll explore the history of residential schools, their impact, and Canada's journey toward reconciliation. Brought to you by Super Simple Sheets. From coast to coast, worksheets that work. Discover the full range of what we offer at supersimplesheets.com. Section 1. The purpose and operation of residential schools. Residential schools were created in the late 1800s as part of Canada's plan to assimilate Indigenous peoples. The government believed that Indigenous children needed to abandon their cultures and adopt European ways of life. More than 150,000 Indigenous children were taken from their families and sent to these schools. Most were run by churches with government funding. The children lived at the schools for months or even years, often far from home. They were forbidden to speak their languages, wear traditional clothing, or practice their cultures. Instead, they were taught European customs, Christianity, and basic skills like reading and writing. But these weren't ordinary schools. Many were poorly built and overcrowded. The children faced harsh discipline, hard labor, and poor nutrition. For some, the schools became places of severe neglect and abuse. This system wasn't about education, it was about control. Section 2. The impact on Indigenous communities. The effects of residential schools were devastating and long-lasting. Many children lost their ability to speak their languages and felt disconnected from their families and cultures. Imagine returning home after years of being told your traditions were wrong. It created a cycle of shame and confusion that carried into adulthood. Some survivors speak of the loneliness and trauma they endured, while others describe losing their identity entirely. This cultural disconnection affected entire communities. Families struggled to pass on their traditions, and many survivors faced challenges with mental health, addiction, or trust. The impact didn't stop with the children who attended the schools. It rippled across generations. This is known as intergenerational trauma, and it's a major reason why reconciliation is so important today. Section 3. Resistance and the road to closure. While the residential school system lasted for more than a century, it didn't go unchallenged. Many Indigenous families resisted sending their children to these schools, though they were often forced to comply. Survivors and communities also fought to share their stories and bring attention to the abuses. The last residential school in Canada closed in 1996, but the truth about the schools wasn't fully acknowledged until years later. In 2008, the Canadian government formally apologized for the residential school system. That same year, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established. This commission gathered stories from survivors, documented the history of residential schools, and created calls to action to help Canada move toward healing and justice. Section 4. The Journey of Reconciliation. Reconciliation is about repairing relationships and making things right, but it's not a quick or easy process. One important part of reconciliation is remembering the truth and honoring the survivors of residential schools. Orange Shirt Day, held every year on September 30th, is one way Canadians show their support. It started with Phyllis Webstad, a survivor whose new orange shirt was taken from her on her first day at a residential school. Today, wearing orange reminds us of the children who never returned home and the survivors who continue to heal. Another part of reconciliation is restoring Indigenous languages and cultures. Many communities are working to teach their languages to younger generations and bring back traditional practices. Land acknowledgements, where people recognize the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, are also becoming more common in schools and public spaces. But reconciliation isn't just about symbols, it's about real change. This means addressing inequalities, respecting treaties, and ensuring Indigenous voices are heard in decisions that affect them. Conclusion. Learning and taking action. The story of residential schools is painful, but it's a chapter of Canadian history that needs to be told. It teaches us about resilience, justice, and the importance of standing up for what's right. As we learn more about the past, we can work together to build a future where every culture is valued and respected. By remembering, listening, and acting, we can all play a part in reconciliation. Let's honor the survivors, celebrate Indigenous cultures, and commit to making Canada a better place for everyone. Thanks for watching. Simplify your teaching journey with super simple sheets. Across Canada, we're known for our ready-to-use, curriculum-aligned worksheets. Dive into our educational solutions at supersimplesheets.com. Super Simple Sheets. From coast to coast, worksheets that work.